Thank you very much, Mr. Latif. I hope it's working. Yeah, it's working now. For this invitation, I have to say I feel nearly at home because you refer to Davos, and PricewaterhouseCoopers is one of our important strategic partners. But actually, speaking here, I remember when we had Davos in New York, and some of you may remember in 2001, we decided just 8 weeks before Davos would have happened in Davos to move it as an act of solidarity here to New York. I have to disappoint you heavily, because when I left Geneva, it was snowing. So you cannot keep me responsible for the sunshine. And when you introduced me, I always in some way got a shock when you mentioned 71, because it's such a long time ago, and it reminds me of a discussion which I had with Tony Blair, who joined our foundation board, and he was still in office in Downing Street, and I visited him, and of course he wanted to know everything about the forum. So I told him what we did already in the 70s, what we did in the 80s, and so on. And suddenly he looked at me and said, actually there are only 3 people around who have been so active on the global scene since the early 70s. And then he said, Castro, Gaddafi, and you. And I have to say, I don't know whether I should say so with regrets or with a certain joy. Since 4 or 5 weeks, there are only 2 around, since Castro left his official function. I want to describe to you, to a certain extent, what we are doing and what roles the World Economic Forum is playing on the global scene, and how we are positioning ourselves. And many of you may remember in 2005, the National Intelligence Council published a report with scenarii of 2020. And actually they had, at that time, they described, it's a very interesting document, they described 4 different scenarios for 2020. The first scenario was a scenario of the American Pax Americana, it was called, which means, I don't have to describe it, that the world order would be still guaranteed by the superpower of the United States. The second scenario was the scenario of a permanent fight, a war between Islam and the West. The war of civilizations in some way. The third scenario was called the chaos scenario. And it described a world which was confronting so many different challenges at the same time, climate change, AIDS, and so on. And it wasn't capable to cope with those different challenges, and the situation gets worse and worse. And the fourth scenario, and of course I was very delighted when I read it, was called the Davos World. And the Davos World is a scenario where, in this new multilateral power structure, actors, state actors, and non-state actors address together the challenges we are confronting. And I repeat, it's not only the state actors, It's also the non-state actors, particularly business, civil society, and so on. And I was pleased to see this description because it expresses so much what the forum is about. We are a multi-stakeholder platform to address the issues on the global agenda. To do it through interaction, through dialogue, and through interaction. Now, if you look, we use so often the expression globalization, and Davos has become a kind of symbol for globalization. But if we look at globalization, actually, we have to differentiate. And there's now a lot of discussion also, can globalization be reversed? Now, let's try to look at different levels of globalization. Of course, when we talk about globalization, we think foremost about economic globalization, economic interaction. And here, there is the danger, through mounting nationalism and so on, that to a certain extent we could slow down the process of globalization which we have. Just look at the trade discussions in quite a number of countries, particularly also in this country. But there's another type of globalization which people often forget about. Risks have become globalized. It's a globalization of challenges and risks. We at the World Economic Forum, we publish every year a report on global risks. And we define global risks as risks which, if they become reality, they affect the all of humankind. And in order to mitigate those risks, it requires global cooperation. And we have defined 35 of such risks. If you are interested, you can go on our website and you can load down this global risk report. And what is interesting, if I look back at the risk report which we published in, we always try to highlight, we have those 35 risks, we monitor them, and we always try to define 3 priorities for each year. So in 2006, we defined for 2007 the following priorities: the vulnerability of the financial system, and that was in autumn 2006 for 2007, the vulnerability of the financial system. Second, the US housing market, and number 3, oil prices. Now, for this year, in the report which we published in November 2007, we highlighted water shortage, food prices, particularly food prices, and energy security. Now I'm back to what the World Economic Forum is doing. We are trying to highlight challenges on the global agenda and, if possible, to be a catalyst for solutions. But the World Economic Forum is probably even more complex. And we are known, of course, when I ask someone, what is the World Economic Forum? What do you know about it? People are capable to describe the World Economic Forum in 5 letters. Davos. But actually, it's much more than Davos. So let me explain our strategy. Let me explain to you our strategy, and it shows also the impact which we are having. And by the way, if I stick with Davos, we have had more impact in the last years on the global media compared to the G8 meeting. But if we really try to look at the World Economic Forum, we have to look at 6 different dimensions. The first dimension is our capability to convene leaders. And it's not only Davos. You know, we have built practically in each region the foremost meeting for regional leaders to convene. Next week, we will have a meeting in Mexico, looking particularly at Latin American challenges. We feel that the interrelationship between global, regional, and I should say also industrial challenges is very important. And as a side remark, we have, based on the hospitality which we found here in the city, we have created our Center for Global Industries just around the corner in the 53rd, is it 53rd? 54th Street. And I have the great pleasure that we have the chairman of our Center for Global Industries, Jean-Pierre Rousseau, with us this evening, and Kevin Steinberg. Kevin, where are you? Who is our COO of our operation here. And our commitment to this city is also shown that we had today a board meeting, and in the board meeting we decided that we double office space, so we will be soon about 80 colleagues located here to serve particularly the New York constituency. But it's not a representative office, it's a center for all our global industry activities. So the first dimension is this convening capability. But convening people is not enough. So we created communities. We always speak about the Davos community. The Davos community is an assembly, if I may use this word, of people, of leaders who are concerned with the state of the world and who are ready and committed to do something about it, to improve the state of the world. So it's a community of purpose. It's a global community. And we have subdivided this community in 26 different smaller communities. So it's not only business. We have a community of political leaders. We have a community of trade union leaders. We have a community of NGOs. We have a community of young global leaders. We have a community of social entrepreneurs, and I could go on and on, 26 different communities. So the forum is a community builder, a global community builder. That's the second dimension. Now, if you build communities, there's a general purpose, improving the state of the world, but there has to be some action. So what we are doing is to create mainly public-private partnerships. And we have today about 50 such different partnerships. For example, we are running in most African countries a public-private partnership to fight malaria, AIDS, and tuberculosis at the workplace. That's one of our many partnerships. So that's the third dimension. The fourth dimension is that we feel the next generation, if you take the median age in the world, it's 25 years. So we have to make efforts to integrate particularly the new generation. The world is changing so fast. There are new paradigms. And for this reason, we put special emphasis also on young global leaders, on the incoming generation of global companies. I was, before coming here, I was at the Kennedy School, and we had 70 of our young global leaders participating in a leadership course. And the participants, let's say, comprised people from the Crown Prince of Norway to the Vice President of one of the smaller Latin American countries, social entrepreneurs, and so on and so on. And I was thinking, when I came out of this lecture, this discussion yesterday night, and I was walking back to my hotel, I was thinking, how would I characterize what I was so enthusiastic. And then I felt, if I would have a theme, if I would be forced now to define a theme for the next annual meeting in Davos, based on my experience, then I would say, from the age of cynicism to the age of idealism. That was my impression of this young generation. So you have, I repeat, the convening power, the community building, the public-private partnerships, and special emphasis given to the future. Now, the fifth dimension, and those 4 dimensions, the first 4 are very well accomplished. The fifth dimension is that we, at the moment, are looking, and not only looking, we are establishing a virtual platform of interaction, a kind of Facebook for global leaders. And we are working together in a consortium which actually comprises Facebook, but which also comprises Adobe, Microsoft, AMD, to develop the most sophisticated interaction system for global leaders, with the objective to have Davos not only once in a year, but to have a virtual Davos across the whole year. The world is moving so fast, so whenever a situation occurs, you can put together the respective leaders. Now, the last dimension, which we are also just now developing, we have, I spoke before about those 35 different risks which we have defined in our global risk report. Now we have extended this, and we have defined 100 different global challenges. It ranges from water issues to competitive issues and so on. And we feel the world today, one of the problems of the world today is that it is still very much compartmentalized. You have finance, you have environment, and so on and so on. But all those issues, just take what I said before, food security. It's interrelated to water, it's interrelated to climate change, it's interrelated to nutrition habits, and so on and so on. So what we want to do, we want to create a mechanism which would allow the world to deal with the issues in an interdisciplinary way. So we have created already quite a number, and the target is by year end to have 100 global agenda councils. So let's take the water issue. What we do is to take the 20 most relevant and most knowledgeable people in the water domain to join this council. Or let's take competitiveness under the leadership, for example, of Michael Porter. We have assembled the 20 top around the world, so it comprises Chinese, Indian, and so on, top specialists in the competitive area. So this network, this foremost intelligence network for global issues will feed into our different activities and will determine, to a certain extent, what we are doing and will be the intellectual backbone of our virtual interaction system. Those are the 6 dimensions of the forum. Let me conclude by just saying one word about our concept of corporate engagement into society. And you may have read my article in Foreign Affairs in the January-February issue, where I try to structure better how corporations should engage into global society. And I distinguish between 5 different types of engagement. The first one is corporate global governance. That's compliance with ethical, legal rules, and I think we can take it for a given in today's world. The second one is corporate philanthropy. We all know it's giving money for a good purpose. The third one is corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility, I define not in this general sense, very vague sense. For me, corporate social responsibility is what you could also express with the triple bottom line responsibility, which means that the corporation in its relations with not only with shareholders but with its neighbors, its employees, and so on, behaves in a responsible way. This is the traditional concept. But today there are 2 additional responsibilities, additional ways of how corporations should engage into society. The first one is social entrepreneurship. We speak a lot about social entrepreneurs, and Hilda and my wife and I, we have created, apart from the forum, a foundation for social entrepreneurship, and we support about 100 social entrepreneurs around the world. So we are very much believers in social entrepreneurs. But also corporations should exercise social entrepreneurship, which means they should use their own creativity and capability to innovate, to create products which respond even better to social needs. I give you an example. I mean, there are many examples. Let's take the new car of Tata. That's certainly an act of social entrepreneurship of a company, using its creativity, its ingenuity to create products or services which help mankind to solve social issues. So that's one new dimension. The other new dimension is corporate global citizenship. Companies have a license, particularly multinational companies, to operate in a global space. We have nobody who is really in charge of this global space. Governments are partially in charge of the global space, but there is a kind of void. Therefore, corporations, together with governments, have a responsibility to address the global challenges by engaging. Let's take the water issue. One of our initiatives where the lead is taken by Nestle, by Peter Brabeck from Nestle, and by our friends from Coca-Cola to define actions, how water shortage, which we can foresee in the future in a much more intense way, how we can address this issue. That's an act of corporate global citizenship. I think Pricewaterhouse is also, together with us, involved in quite a number of such activities of corporate global citizenship. So we are living in a new world which needs new approaches to how we manage our global interdependence. And I may add I started with a quote of Tony Blair, so I may add also, I may finish with a quote of Tony Blair. One sentence he said in Davos this year, which is obvious, of course it's something which is obvious, but it sticks into my mind. He said the defining issue of the 21st century will be how we define the management of global interdependence. Thank you. Any comment, question?
Dr. Schwab, we did get a few questions in advance, so maybe I'll just run through one or two of them just to get the activity going here. But one was discussion about, so we got a few questions in advance, Hassan. So one of the comments was around Africa. And if you take a look at India and China and the development economically within those countries, where do you see Africa relative to the achievement that they've had or the countries like India and China have had, and what's your view as to where Africa sits and where it's headed?
As a general remark, I come back to this issue of food security, which the increase of food prices, I think, is a major challenge for the world, and particularly for countries like Africa, but also India and China. Just to illustrate the dimension of the issue, if you take, and I have only approximately the figures in my mind, if you take a European consumer's basket, I think you have around, depending on the country, you have around 15 to 20%, which is allocated to food. If you take an Egyptian consumer basket, it's 50%. If you take a consumer basket in Kenya, it's 65%. So let's take Egypt. If you increase the food price by 2, what has happened for many of the commodities, you practically eat away the household budget, and particularly of the poor families. So I see the big danger for the coming years. Yes, we made progress in Africa. The forum, I think, was one of the catalysts for, together with Bono, to cancel debts of the least developed countries. Yes, we make progress, but look at Egypt now. I see major social tensions. We speak about the gap between the rich and the poor, but by mounting food prices, this will be, how shall I say, accentuated in a way which could lead to not only to social unrest, but to political revolts in quite of those countries. Now, India and China, we see in China already also with the, again, mainly with the food price increase, rising inflation. Inflation, I don't know whether this is a specialist here, but it's approaching now in some areas 10%. So the combined with the reduced export possibilities to the United States, the whole China philosophy is based on fast growth. And we have this slogan of harmonious society, but the harmonious society is only possible provided everybody in the boat is better off. And here, I think we are the crucial phase in those countries. Sorry for the long answer, but those are big countries.
They are big countries. You commented in your earlier part of your discussion that in 2006 you identified housing market, which certainly a number of us probably have felt the pressure in the housing market in the U.S., as well as the financial sector, and we've had certainly what some would describe as at least a partial meltdown in the financial sector around the world relative to the credit crunch and subprime lending. And obviously we see it starting to spread across Europe. Just your comments on kind of the status of the global economy, your perspective on duration of the difficulties that we face in the financial sector, and what you see as some of the corrective actions that may need to be taken.
If I could just add, is this leading to...
That was already a lot.
Is this leading to anti-Americanism? Because in the Sunday Times, New York Times, there was a very thorough...
I'll sit down for this one.
...story on the UBS shareholders meeting, and there seemed to be a current of anti-Americanism connected to the subprime mortgage crisis.
Frankly, I mean, coming from Switzerland, I didn't feel any anti-Americanism. It was anti-UBSism, which has developed very much in Switzerland, because this is a national icon, and people just cannot understand, because if you bring it into the context, roughly the loss is now the loss which has been, let's say, put on the table, and what is still possible in the open. We speak here about 40 billion Swiss francs or dollars. It's the same today. But if you relate it, if you relate this to the Swiss national product, it's about 10%. Of course, it's not only Swiss who are the losers. It's internationally interwoven. But practically every Swiss pension fund and so on is substantially affected. But I don't think, I haven't heard, in no case I have heard that this course, let's say the blame was given to the US. The blame is clearly given to the management of the UBS. Now, if I come back to the question, I spoke before that we create those global advisory or global agenda councils, and we had last week a global agenda council just on these issues with the best financial, economic experts and so on. And I would say the opinion was somewhere in between of what the IMF has published yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, and what I hear when I talk to the people. Our members are much more upbeat compared to the IMF forecast. But in this Global Agenda Council, the opinion was that it will affect quite substantially the real economy, because so much wealth has been, it's not only the subprime. If you take in addition the increased oil price, the transfer of enormous capital to the oil-producing countries, if you take the costs of the Iraq war, and if you put everything together, somewhere it must have an effect on the real economy. And just to give you one figure, I was very In Davos this year, we were very much involved, and we had practically all the sovereign wealth funds present. And if you make some projections, the total capital of wealth funds at the moment is already, according to certain well-informed estimates, is already equal to the total amount managed by hedge funds, about $2 trillion. If you take in 2007 the total value worldwide of the equity markets, we speak about roughly $61 trillion. Now, if you make a projection, and the projection is that in the year 2015, the oil-producing countries and the national wealth funds, the sovereign wealth funds, will have accumulated somewhere in between 10 and 15 trillion dollars. Now, if you relate this amount to the equity markets, you see what enormous role the sovereign wealth funds will play on the global equity scene. And with all the issues which are related to it, I mean national control, we have practically what we have, some people say, is a nationalization of the economy, but the nationalization, it's a globalization of nationalization. It's not your own government, it's a foreign government which takes the equity. Now, I don't want to be negative against, I mean, we have the case of Norway, and we have very, very responsible actors in this field. But we should not underestimate what over time this enormous transfer of capital means for all of us, and particularly for the financial markets.
Professor Klaus, my question has to do with, it almost seems as though Davos is moving, if I may use the word, from a platform conversation, ideas, to a more execution phase. And my question is, do you think there's a possibility of conflict? I know President Clinton has a forum where he asks corporations to commit to achieve certain targets. The UN has a children fund that deals with malaria. A lot of these organizations rely on corporate dollars. And my question is, do you think that there's a conflict that you're heading into where with the funds and what you're trying to do?
No, I welcome those initiatives, and actually, I'm proud of it that President Clinton, in his book, he says he got the idea in Davos. But there is a difference. We put emphasis on what I said before, public-private partnerships, which we accompany. So when we define a project like our global educational initiative, I just describe it in a second, we have, under the leadership of Cisco and many other companies, practically all the big names, we try to revolutionize the educational system of Jordan, Egypt, and now Burundi, by working together with the local authorities. We work also together with UNESCO, not only to equip the schools, but to retrain the teachers, to put the new curricula into place. So we work together we accompany those companies. We do not, such a difference to the Clinton initiative, which mainly, and which is a good thing, which asks companies to pledge some money, to make a commitment, and then to come back and to report. We are with the initiative or from the beginning to the end. But there's one other difference. We feel, particularly with a promulgation or proliferation of such other, I mean, everybody is now somewhere active and so on, has become very competitive. We concentrate more and more on what we are really unique in, which is global thought leadership. So let's look at the future of the energy industry and its impact. I mean, just to take one abstract example. So it's more the thought leadership which we try to provide, and less the concrete action. But we need the concrete action since people expect somewhere results. And I was asked before during the drinks, how do you measure the success of the World Economic Forum? And of course, you can go on our website, and there are all kinds of success stories we are very proud of. Our impact, which we had politically in South Africa, in quite a number of places. But I think for us, people say, look, for example, at the CGI, the Clinton Initiative, you have clear measurements. Our situation is a little bit different. You can measure what we achieve, as well as you can measure the impact of New York Times or Washington Post or whatever it is. We highlight certain global issues. We try to define the issue. We try to make proposals. We try to be a catalyst for action. And we feel, so it's also a fine line, we do not take decisions. So people say, why don't you come out with a communique after Davos? But we don't have, we are an organization for the 21st century, which means we are a networked organization. I don't believe in those official papers which nobody reads at the end. And I remember, no, I don't want to go into it. But I think what is very important, if you look at the complex world of the 21st century, nobody will be able to create a global government. That's out of question. We have to reinforce the existing institutions. It's also clear, like NATO and so on. But I think the main impulse, the main drive will come from networks which are purpose-oriented and which comprise the relevant actors and the best knowledgeable people. Shall we take one last question?
Hello. I have a question in terms of the 21st century that we're in. You mentioned earlier about the accumulation of great wealth, whether it be oil wealth or other wealth in other parts of the world. Well, given that most of the world is not free, most countries, I think there are only 90 countries in the world, according to Freedom House, that are democracies. Given what seems to be an accumulation of wealth, a redistribution of wealth, to societies that are not democratic and are not perhaps as egalitarian as the West. Do you have any concerns about this, or is your organization doing anything to work in this area?
I think we are all aware that based also on the discussion and the impulses which we gave in Davos this year, there are now attempts the IMF is in the lead, to develop better governance rules for sovereign wealth funds. So something is in the making to subject those funds to rules which we would expect. And actually, you have some national reactions. For example, yesterday, the German government decided to create a body similar to apparently a body, I don't know the name, which exists in the United States. So every investment which is over a certain size has to get approval from this intergovernment body, which to a certain extent is again, we have a new kind of protectionism. Now, you said, what is the forum doing about it? We first, I think we put the issue on the table, and I give you a very practical example. The forum just made a proposal to the sovereign wealth funds. Why don't you create a kind of international investment fund where each of you contributes, for example, $5 billion, and you have one international fund which would neutralize this issue of national ownership. And this fund, I described it in the following way, would work like, let's say, the company Berkshire Hathaway to take long-term investments into global companies and possibly into distressed global companies. So this is a practical proposal where we acted as a catalyst for.
On that note, I'd like to thank Professor Schwab. Please join me in giving him a big hand.
Thank you.
Great. Marlon, Klaus, and Nelson.